Place to be is living free in Tennessee.
Welcome to Living Free in Tennessee, where we talk about building the life you choose on your terms. Today is Tuesday, January 21st, 2024, and it's a Tuesday show, which is also the Living Free podcast. That's right. We're spinning this one off as a standalone show. So that's been developing in a really fun way this month. Okay. For those of you who've been playing along at home, yes, Brunhilde, the flying saucer-shaped sheep who couldn't walk between two trees and has just been refusing to give birth, gave birth this morning at 5 a.m. She has two, I don't know what gender, and they appear to be doing well. Tactical will be checking about halfway through the show. We're doing an hourly check-in right now because one of them was having a little trouble latching on, but I think that was solved by our last check-in. Anyway, having a discussion with John Athayde about artificial intelligence. This started over on our Living Free in Tennessee Telegram group where we were talking about AI. And I was like, well, I know that John does some pretty cool work in the marketing and communications field. And I was like, I wonder how AI is impacting what he's doing. So we're going to dive into that discussion, the good, the bad, and how is he doing it. Before we do that, though, I want to talk to you about our featured event of today's show, and it is the Living Free in Tennessee Spring Workshop. It is April 24th, 25th, and 26th, which is a Thursday, Friday, and Saturday over at my place in the Holler Homestead. I'm an hour east of Nashville, so if you're flying in, you go to Nashville, Tennessee. We're really focusing on regenerative food and regenerative growth. So we grow our business, we grow our food, we grow ourselves. And I've got some fun sessions queued up to you, including one from Alan Booker. Alan Booker is a really great permaculture teacher. He does a PDC that makes sense, and he comes from it from a very scientific standpoint, but also speaks in language that normal humans can understand without a PhD. So you're getting the PhD level instruction without needing to have the PhD to understand it. I'm going to do a session on lessons learned after 3 years of sheep. We've got 2 half-day permaculture sessions from Alan. Harry Albright's going to do a hands-on project about how to build cages, wire cages. John Pugliano will be there talking about building generational wealth with permaculture principles. And he's doing ham radio and Meshtastic. Patrick Horman's doing something. We don't know exactly what yet. He decided to think about that for a bit. Carrie Brown is talking about planting for trees on the homestead. And I've got a bunch of other speakers that we're rolling out this week. If you want to see what's up at the Spring Workshop, it's over at livingfreeintennessee.com. Just click on Spring Workshop and you'll see that. I also wanted to thank our 2 sponsors of today's show. The first sponsor is Above Phone. That's right. It's a freedom podcast. Why not have a freedom phone as your sponsor? Check them out, abovephone.com. And if you want to get $50 off your phone, it's Live Free TN. Live Free TN. That's all in the show notes, as is a link to the Above Phone website. Our second sponsor of today's show is Holler Roast, because it's Tuesday coffee. Got to have a coffee sponsor, so don't forget to get freshly roasted coffee delivered straight to your door at hollerroast.com. With that, I'm going to bring in John Athayde. Welcome to the show.
Howdy, howdy. I'm drinking my
Holler. I do this every time, don't I?
Yeah, we do. It's fine. Athayde. It's afraid of the TH, at least here.
A spade. Yeah.
A spade, Athayde. That's a good one. I'll have to use that one.
Yeah.
The phone will say it in the Portuguese way, but I mean, we've been here for, I don't know, over 100 years. So at this point, it's kind of just like it is.
Whatever happens.
We say it in the States.
Okay, so for those of my listeners who are new, like, who or what is a John Athayde? And how did you end up on my podcast of all places?
So yeah, a couple of funny threads going back and forth. I was in DC for a long time, and I went to architecture school. I did 3D web print. I've just kind of grown up in the internet. Oregon Trail generation for the win, right? That 77 to 83 crew, and give or take, and ended up in kind of 2006-07, starting to kind of see like, hey, everything's not okay. What's going on? You start diving in and peeling back the onion. Started really getting into doing, things where, okay, we're going to pick up and split a half of a cow with like 7 families, because all of us are, in apartments. We can't, I can fit like a small little cube freezer on the top of the fridge. What can I get in there? And so that just kept growing. I had a crazy balcony garden going in Arlington where, thank God it was a concrete slab. I would be concerned otherwise for deflection there. And then ended up meeting my current wife, and she and I spent a lot of time. She was much more involved in this, and I kind of got a lot of exposure to the libertarian circles. And she had known you through some of those libertarian circles, if I recall correctly. And so just kind of one of those things where it's like these weird confluences of things, and we ended up getting to meet and talk, and a couple times we've been on this and chatted on stuff. We've been out to the compound in the holler, as it were, and definitely the event over at John's place, and yeah. So it's just been doing the thing. So we moved out to Charlottesville, Virginia in 2013, about just under a 15-acre farm. Started off with goats, and now we've got a dairy cow and chickens, all that kind of stuff, gardens. So it's the kind of you buy one thing all of a sudden, and it's like, oh, I can do this. Oh, I'm going to do this over here. And then all of a sudden you're like, how did I end up with an hour of chores in the morning?
Yeah, I was going to say, I saw Whitney at an event in Seattle. We're all in our little like suits it was actually conservative, not a libertarian event. I think it was a Heritage Foundation thing. And he's like, I have a homestead crush on you. Cause I was like putting up pictures of all my ducks and whatnot. And now I think you have more homestead than I do at this point.
I don't know. I think you're probably a little more full time with it than we are. We definitely, it's still like a hobby farm, right? I mean, we're both working full time from home and homeschooling 4 humans, and so then the farm is part of that, but it's also not where we're at any semblance of if I sat down and wrote out my checklist of all the things, right? I'm not doing a lot of them that I'd love to, but it's also the reality of like, for 4 young humans that are actually coming to the point where now they can be very helpful. That when they're under 8, it's kind of like they can help, but sometimes it takes twice as long. Now we're getting to the force multiplier where like the boys were up in the hay loft, which is literally right above me here in my office, and we were slinging hay up, and they were stacking it. And it was like, yes. I've got 8 to 10 years, and then they're like, bye, Dad, see ya. Right. So
I'm never farming again.
Right after about bale 70 is that you start saying that, you're like, is this what I really signed up for? But then you're like, okay, this works. This is all right.
Yeah, it's alarming how much hay we've been going through in the last week or two since all this cold settled in, and of course all of the births out of season. Well, you have built a life of freedom, I would say. And this is a Living Free podcast. So what did it take for you to figure out what you needed to do to build the life you're living now? Because when you went Whitney, you were both employed in DC, living a city life.
Correct. Yeah. So we hilariously, I had actually lived 2 blocks from her apartment, in my apartment, and we had never met. It's just typical, big city kind of story, right? And I moved out. I was working for a Ruby on Rails shop called InfoEther, and at a Reston, and I moved out to one of the owners had a place out in Leesburg that was right there south of town, but right next to Oatlands Plantation, and there's this kind of eco preserve and things like that. So it felt very rural, but I was like 15, 20 minutes from Reston. So, and they were pretty flexible in the sense of coming into the office or not. So I started working from home a lot more. And I had been more or less doing my own thing or working from home for, I say 50% of the years before that since graduating school. So it wasn't like a big jump for me to do that. But I was the design guy in a Ruby on Rails shop. So a lot of fun there. I got to learn an incredible amount about programming and how things go together and how to build web applications, right? It's not just putting the ink on it and saying, here is how it looks, but like, how do we actually turn this into a product? And coming out there, I started doing, gardening and stuff like that more and just kind of, detoxing a little bit. And that's where, and it's funny because that's when I met Whitney. And so now from 2 blocks to a 45-minute drive, that was kind of one of those things, but that was kind of the thing. And, very early on, I was kind of like, I want to go more this way and less back into the city. Just so mental model, if you're not down with that, like we probably don't want to take a lot of time here if that's not something you're potentially interested in. But it was I was pretty much starting to work from home. We got acquired by Living Social, and I kept working out there. I'd go into the office once or twice. Whitney and I got married. We moved to a townhouse in Alexandria, right inside the Beltway, so back into the fray, as it were. But I was still working from home 3-4 days a week, and I'd go in to the office, which was right by the White House, and we do our thing. But this was the heyday of the open office plan. So it's concrete, hard surfaces, cacophony. And for an ADD person, being like, I'm just like, what? Hey, what's that? I mean, and it's funny. You go into these spaces, every engineer has got like mega noise canceling headphones on. They put blinders up around their thing. It's just like, why are we doing this? Why are we all coming into this space when we're all trying to like isolate? And then it became, the company grew super fast. We were 10 or 15 people at that point, and they were 15 people from the engineering perspective, and we merged. And then that engineering team in a year grew to 150. And that became an international engineering team. So all of a sudden, it's not that, oh, so-and-so is remote. It's like, no, that's the Denver office. No, that's our friend working over in India. That's our friend doing this over here. And so it became less of a, you have to physically be here. And people started doing one of the important things was Chad Fowler, who was the head of the engineering group at that point, said, if any one person is remote, everybody dials into Google independently from their desk, as opposed to I'm sure everyone's suffered through this. You're the one remote person, everyone piles into a conference room and you can't hear a lick. You're just like, I got nothing to contribute because I just hear this like low din until somebody says, hey, what do you think about that? You're like, I have no idea what's going on. Got nothing. So that was a game changer because it made everybody aware that, oh, hey, this person's not present physically, so we're all going to go into a virtual thing. And once that happened, more and more people started being like, oh, wait, I don't have to physically be there and this can work.
So your path to freedom was about having a job originally where you could work remotely.
Yeah, because I basically ejected from there. I was at Living Social, and I just called up Glenn and said, hey, man, I want to move to Charlottesville. And is that a problem? He's like, no, we need to work through the steps. But because the company had become remote, and that was a thing that people were supporting, it was doable. And at the same point, my wife got a job where she could do what she was doing remotely. And so that was a big game changer too, because it was like, we have no reason to not move. We want to buy a place. And as you drive around Northern Virginia, this is 2013, townhouses from the low 600s on Orion Homes development. So it's not even like a nice townhouse. It's like a builder grade townhouse. And you're just like, there's nothing low about that number. I don't know what you're talking about. And so, we ended up getting a farm for much less than that. And that was the thing. It was like, okay. We started looking, like she had gone to UVA here. So when I was open to pretty much anywhere. And she was like, this little circle around Charlottesville is your search zone. She approved that. And, it's funny when you say 30-minute drive and all of a sudden you do a 30-minute drive, you're like, I don't want to do that every day. And so, you start, we kind of ended up finding a really nice place, and Charlottesville has the Albemarle County surrounding it has an interesting development limitations. So there's very specific development corridors and everything else is very rural. So we're 15 minutes from Target and all these things and the airport and all that stuff. But I can go out on a clear night and see a line of the Milky Way. Right. So it's kind of that best of both worlds, especially with young kids. It's really hard to be like, oh, we're going to be 45 minutes out in the middle of nowhere and everything's this huge drive and huge transit. Because then you're just commuting, doing something else instead of, commuting to an office. Everything else is the commute. So that was being able to have that work from home and having built up the career to that point where we could say, oh, okay, cool, I can go do this. That was like the key kind of foundational blocks to getting us out here. Because then it was less of because I was still making my DC salary. So it was less of like, oh, can I find a job where I want to be? And more of just like, can we find the right place for us? And then I can just do the job. Now, granted, moving in, I had 40 down, 5 up DSL. So that was a little rough. We finally got gig fiber a year and a half ago, and that's a game changer. But, we made it work. But it was DSL is painful. And so I do. And like Starlink wasn't a thing, right? So but that's
Starlink is good until it's not good.
That's that too.
That's the thing about Starlink. And so that's one of my long-term backup plans is I would like a Starlink, but then I have fiber here now. Same thing. We got fiber about a year and a half ago. And same thing. I was DSL until that time. It worked. And it was actually better than like cable and other services I'd had in Nashville, Tennessee from a stability standpoint.
Sure.
But nothing is going to happen quickly when you have a large file. And you do video. So you were uploading big files all the time. Like I just do the audio stuff, right? So
well, yeah, and that's the joke. Like, right, you're like, oh, I got to upload this final video to Frame. All right, publish. I'm going to go to bed. Right? And in the morning, you're like, please tell me you didn't crash overnight. I mean, it's like going back to like, being at college in the late 90s, and you're hitting render on the 3D program in architecture school, like, please don't crash. Please don't crash. You're like praying to a little Pentium 133, like, you can do it, man. It's
So what production are you getting off your homestead at this point, while you and Whitney are both working full-time, homeschooling your boys and all of that?
So right now, I mean, normally we'd be doing milk, but right now we bred our Jersey calf. We have a great vet here that a large ruminant vet that comes out, and so she did the breeding. We have her calf from a year and a half ago is about to go to the butcher. So we're going to be coming in with she is a more diminutive Jersey. She's not a miniature, but she was bred to a miniature. So the steer is not, I mean, he's big, but he's not like a full Jersey bull, right? It's like a half or 3/4 size. So that's, he's scheduled for next month. And then chickens is pretty much it. And then we've had the gardens, but the gardens are,
we've just had an
good at doing like kind of the Elliott Coleman winter harvest thing, right? So we're kind of
the garden thing again. Either my internet cut out or yours did. The gardens are what?
So the gardens are put to bed. We're not doing like the Elliott Coleman 4-season harvest yet. I'd love to get into that, but I mean, I still haven't cleared half the garden, right? Yeah. So forget like getting like rows up and things like that. And then we have this greenhouse that we finally finished after years of construction. Yeah. We finished it. We started it on my 40th birthday, effectively. We got the roof on it at that point. We finally finished it, 6 years later. But now is the point where now I'm starting to figure out, I have a bunch of these IBC totes that I got from my brother who was working in the vaping industry. They had a bunch of glycerin. So it is food grade, right? It's not something where it was like, I don't know what chemical was in here. And so, I've got a friend down in South Carolina who did some really crazy aquaponics stuff. Like just insane greenhouse setup with that. And so I'm kind of trying to channel some of that energy and see what I can do to kind of look at what some options are to get kind of more, it's like kind of what you had set up originally outside, where you've got a couple of these ebb and flow beds and something like that, trying to start to build on that. And just, all these things you got to do one small. Like, that's what I've realized the most. Like, if I say I'm going to create a complete aquaponics, empire here with 50 tanks and blah, blah, it'll never happen. But if I get one, okay, now we've got something. Now we can say, okay, let's run a test. Does this work? Do we even like this thing? Do I like tilapia from a tank? I don't know. I mean, I've had tilapia before, but is that something we want?
I grow goldfish and I don't eat them, and I have koi.
Well, there you go. Yeah, but then then they're serving part of their filtration purpose, right? And so yeah, so there's figuring out what they do, and do I get food from that, or is that just part of the system that makes the system work as a loop, right? All that good stuff, right? And so that's kind of where we're. Pardon me. That's where we're at.
So why is somebody so grounded in growing food by hand and the sort of slow food movement, which is relatively low tech, interested in artificial intelligence?
That's a great question. So I'm a dabbler. That's one. I mean, polymath sounds too egotistical to say. I think that's saying I'm wonderful, but I just I like a lot of different things, and I deep dive in a lot of different things, and I like the connections between those things. And what has been fascinating playing with this over the past few years is, one, how fast it's evolved, right? I mean, this has been under development for decades, but like where we've really kind of seen, we've gone from weird 6-finger Salvador Dali smoking crack and dropping acid to that's almost photoreal. And it's like, I can still tell a little bit of things are off, but then what can be done with this from a tool perspective, especially in the programming space. So I can write Ruby on Rails. I can make a web app. I can ship it. I've done it before, and I have a couple things running. But there's times where you hit a wall and you're like, okay. And so what you used to do is you used to go in and you used to browse through Stack Overflow or look at things like that. I'm trying to figure out this idea or trying to figure out this thing. And all of a sudden you're like, 4 hours later, you've made no progress and you're frustrated and you're finding articles from a decade ago with a different version of the software. And it's like, okay, this is not going to work. And you end up, kind of throwing up a card and saying, okay, I'm going to go into my chat room and say, okay, here's where I'm at. I've researched this for 4 hours and I can't figure this out. And somebody tells you it in 2 minutes. But if you would have just shown up and said, tell me how to do this, they would have been like, go Google it. Right. So you've got this like weird, like it's this very delayed gratification loop of getting features shipped and getting things built. And all of a sudden starting to play with ChatGPT when 4 came out. Right. So like a give or take 70 billion parameter model, you're starting to say, this is not perfect, but that's a really interesting way to talk about it. Okay, let me try that and see. That's not going to work. I know that's fake code. Let me change that to be the right thing. Oh, that worked. Huh. Okay. And it's gotten better and better and better. And so, most of the time when I'm coding now, I'm using Claude Sonnet in Cursor, which is basically VS Code, the free editor from Microsoft. And they have integrated a variety of AI tools to it. So it's kind of a mishmash of a couple different things. But you can literally sit there, open up a couple different files and say, hey, I've got an object here that is an address, and I need that to work across 4 different other things, person, company, this, that. How do I do that? And it actually can walk you through it. There's a lot of prompting to do where you actually start to say, okay, I need you to approach it from this way, or make sure that you know about these things. So what's interesting is that this is less of a technical approach and it's more of a conversation. I'm now actually having to think conversationally with this interface. So from a designer perspective, this is a whole new kind of UI. It's a text command, and this is not the only UI that AI is going to have, but this is the most popular right now. But you're able to sit there and start saying, okay, I'm going to have a conversation about things. And it's not just about software development, right? So when my wife and I went to a wedding in Ireland, and we basically were like, we want to do a tea. We want to do a classic, whatever thing while we're in Dublin. So, hey, where are some places that have a high tea and blah, 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 and what are the pros and cons of each? Whoa, okay, let's go research those. Oh, that one looks cool, right? So instead of sitting there, this is becoming, and I'm not sure how soon this is going to happen. This is definitely moving towards where your search interface is no longer google.com. Your search interface is now a voice or a command line that you have become, you've interacted with a lot, and you've come to trust it because it's starting to learn you and your preferences. And it's actually going to be starting to feed that stuff back to you in a way that you're like, yep, that's right. Now, that being said, this is AI in general. A good rule of thumb is a very, very eager intern that wants to please you and will often make shit up. So you gotta think that this is not, I'm not going to the mountain here and seeing the Oracle at Delphi. This is an executive assistant that is coming in from college for the summer. They're like, oh, I want to do that. Oh, I want to do that. That's really cool. And it's going to shift. It'll get better over time, and it has been getting better over time. But you can't put blind faith in these things. They are very good, but they have very weird limits in weird ways. You start finding those very quickly. Like, I would not, if it said, oh yeah, you should go put, magnesium sulfate on this plant and it'll do this, I would definitely go check for some sources, and make sure that that's not the thing. Because if you just go out and do whatever it tells you to, you'll probably kill your garden. But these
what's
things.
Fun is, so Steven Reisner, who's a plant guy, programmed a GPT with all of his permaculture plant stuff.
Nice.
And you can trust the recipe if you use that one, because it's not looking at the whole world. It's looking at a narrow set of things.
And that's really the future. The future is not a one model to rule them all. It's very specific expert models, if you think of it that way, right? So you're going to have kind of a conductor. And so I ask a question to the conductor, and the conductor's like, I don't know anything about this, but I got 4 models that are garden specific. So let's go over there and see what they come back with. Okay, 3 of them agree on this. We're going to go with that answer, right? So that's, I think, where you're going to start seeing the future. And that also is something where you can actually start running this locally. So I can run Llama 3, which is Meta's open source model. I can run that on my Mac, the 70 billion parameter model, because it just takes RAM. And so I've got a pretty souped up video machine here with a Mac Studio M1. and that it can't run the 405 billion crazy model. It'll run that one. And then there's people have made, Open Web UI is basically a chat GPT like interface to your local models or any API. So you can have it go out and talk to the Open API's API or Open AI's API. There we go. So many letters. But the benefit is then you're not reliant on connectivity or things like that. And sometimes the local models will not do I'm not allowed to talk about that.
Yeah.
So yeah, it depends. Not all of them are open to that level, but there's a lot more freedom in a local model especially when you're skirting the bounds of what has been blessed by the powers that be, as it were.
Yeah.
So
how loud is this lamb right now?
Oh, I'm hearing it. It sounds like it's hungry.
Yeah, it is hungry, and I think Tactical needs to heat the bottle, but I'm closing my studio door. Hopefully that'll.
That's
he walked in, made a coffee, and it's like, but what about me?
It's like, human, come back.
Well, I'm trying to teach it to go 6 hours. Is what's going on.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
House lambs and house goats are fun.
Yeah, so the large language models, I was mind blown a year ago when I saw you could program them with your own data. I still haven't figured out how to do that, though. But I'm like, so how do we get like a Living Free in Tennessee large language model that just gives you answers?
Well, there's a couple things too. It's not just a Living Free in Tennessee language model that has every transcript of every episode and then can answer based off that. It's effectively going to start mimicking you.
Yeah.
And so there's a couple things like 11 Labs and stuff like this, where with a 10 to 15 minute sample of a voice, it can get to the point where somebody that doesn't know you could be tricked. And with more training, you can get to the point where you really got to have a code word or something to know that this is not the person I'm expecting to talk to, especially if you sit there and say, oh yeah, I'm a little under the weather, right? Because the formant or the vocals a little bit off, but it's nothing that you can't chalk up to a bad cell connection, right? So that's where things start getting dangerous. I don't know how else to describe it, like concerning and dangerous, right? Like where somebody can sit there and pretend to be a family member or a friend, and that's where you started to see some of these fraud cases where people have been tricked out of money because somebody said, oh, I'm in a hospital and I need somebody's coming to pick up, I need this money. And so you being able to have those kind of safe words, or something like our pastors had to get up and say, he's like, I will never send you an email asking you for a gift card or money.
Yeah, same.
So don't do it. Yeah. Or Bitcoin or anything, right? Yeah, I will never do that. So please, if you ever see that, don't respond. Even just to trash it or whatever. Send it to the FBI fraud, but whatever. Do not engage. Because the first time I saw this, like that kind of thing with the text messaging was 2019-ish, maybe. I was working at Powerfleet, and it was my first meeting. I was on site for the first time with the CEO. And we were all, it was like the whole company went up to Mahwah, New Jersey for this get together for this meeting. And I get a text like, hey, could you send over a blah, blah, blah. I need this gift card thing real quick. And I'm like, that's weird. And so I pinged my boss and I'm like, what, does this guy need this? And he's like, no. Because I had not seen it before. And I was like, what is this thing? And I've had friends that have been taken by that too. Cause it's one of those things where it fits into a very narrow thing where it's like, we don't want, especially in an employer-employee thing, we're used to following orders to an extent, right? And so if they say, oh, hey, I need you to do blank, you're like, okay, cool. Yeah. I exist to be outsourced to from the upstream. So that's a hard thing, especially for people that haven't played with this or seen these kind of attack vectors before, to be like, oh, yeah, no, not going to do that.
What strikes me with the large language models like ChatGPT is now everybody's using them for their marketing.
Yeah.
And because I use ChatGPT, I can tell.
I'm upset because apparently ChatGPT loves M dashes, and I do too. And I've now been told if you use an M dash or AI, I'm like, no. So
I use them.
I actually use them in copy. They're good. They're wonderful. But yeah, no, that is a thing. And you start to notice, what's the right way to say it? I mean,
phrases. It's like secure your spot today is a typical If I want to promote an event, it's going to say secure your spot today. No matter how much I tell it not to say that, it's going to say
trained.
That.
It's trained on thousands of pages, just like, that are large events. And for 10 years, people have used that phrase.
Yeah.
And so now it's just copy. It's not, everyone's like, oh, AGI, which is this, concept of that a super, AI will become sentient is the easiest way to think about it, right? Like Skynet goes active or whatever. But it's a prediction model. It's not really thinking. I know that's really hard for some people because you interact with it and you're like, this is weird. Like, no, it's meant to feel like it's you're interacting with a person, but it is really a predictive linear algebra engine on crack. And so you have to kind of just say, okay, that's here. And I think the vision there was, so Apple made this ad 1987, right before Steve Jobs came back, called Knowledge Navigator. And it's classic 80s and for everything from the font to the clothing to the Vaseline on the lens kind of vibe. But it's a professor, and he goes into his office and he has a conversation with a tablet computer. And that is basically, if you look at that and you look at, especially at Apple's roadmap for the past 20 years, they've been chasing that. You can kind of now see all the dots looking backwards. But tablet computer, video chat, all these things, like, making a phone call on your computer. 20 years ago, we were like, that's never going to happen. And now, I'm just going to pop FaceTime up here, or here we're talking, over 1,000 miles.
Watch.
Yeah, like, hey, how's it going, right? I mean, like, that's Dick Tracy style, right? I mean, like, all these things that were like sci-fi are now reality. So there's definitely we're going after this North Star, from a product management perspective. And there's definitely some ethical concerns on that front.
Let's talk about let's start with the good. What's good about AI at this point from
wow. Well, it's enabling people to do things they couldn't do. For example, I can concept and think up a product and build it and ship it. I could do stuff that I was able to use Claude, which is from Anthropic.
CLAUD?
CLAUDE. To generate Python code to dedupe a donor list for the local Scout Council. I could not write Python. I can look at the code and be like, oh, this is what it's doing. But if you said write this in Python from scratch, it would have taken me weeks, maybe months. And I had it done in a couple days. And it was mostly because real world data is hard. It's messy, it's dirty, it comes in, it's not formulated well. And so going through and it's like, okay, I got 80% with the first pass. Let me figure out what it missed, and I got to add these rules. So your nice, clean 15-line script becomes 300 lines very quick to catch all these conditional things. That's one. Some of the cool stuff that's happening outside of just software, material sciences, medicine, a lot of stuff, chemistry. So they're developing new materials, and they're able to, they have really good computer models to test what these things will do before they actually fabricate, that or come up and build that out. And so coming up with things that are more structural, or with medicines, like it'll just plow through and say, oh, here's a combination you haven't tried before. We should test this because it should have this effect. Things that we may find eventually are things that the computer, it's running these things, it has less bias than a person. It still has the bias of its creator, in the sense of like that, it is software, so that it embodies some of the biases. But in a lot of these things, it's not going to sit there and say that won't work because this other thing like it didn't work. It's going to be like, well, it's different, so it might work. Like, let's put it in the queue and try it. So those are some of the cool things. And again, some of the other stuff, like I was talking with a friend of mine who is a product person at Amazon, and I won't use his name just because I don't want to. I didn't tell him I was going to be doing this, but we were actually having a conversation yesterday about this, and he brought up a really fascinating concept of where the good here is. Like, there are a lot of problems, he said, that are unsolvable or considered unsolvable by humanity. What if that is no longer the case? What if through these tools and through these language models and through various other forms of computation, we are able to solve some of these problems? What does that do? And the one we were discussing, for example, was like for example, scarcity. What happens if you're in a, for lack of a better word, Star Trek post-scarcity world? What is the reality of that? Like, is it Star Trek, or is it like the mouse experiment where they had the rats in the maze and they gave them everything they wanted and they basically turned into cannibals and killed each other? Like, who knows, right? And like, what are societal things that have to happen? Is it, from either a societal understanding or a religious framework or whatever that would actually make that not happen? Like that, these are the kind of things we just don't know. And so but there's a lot more potential out there that we didn't have. And then, I mean, there's also the fun things where I want to make, I want to have Donald Trump singing a silly song or something, whatever, right? I mean, there's the fun generative AI that's silly, but that's where you start to walk that line, right?
Yeah. Well, what about using it to market things and promote, to tailor messages to different end users?
Yeah. So this is what we do with user experience. So you can actually create personas, right?
Mm-hmm.
And normally
is user experience a tool?
Pardon?
Is user experience a tool?
No, it's just a product,
okay.
like user experience in the sense
the
of
user experience.
UX. Yeah, UX practice.
I'm taking notes on what tools you mentioned. You're mentioning stuff I haven't used yet.
Yeah. No, there's so many, and this changes so fast, right? And we can kind of do a high level overview of some of them at the end there. But the user experience research is a great example. Like normally I would sit there and I would need to go out and hire a bunch of people. And usually these are hour-long sessions. We pay them anywhere from $100 to $150, usually with an Amazon gift card or something like that, to try the software. They don't have any idea what it is. And we actually want them to not have any idea what it is and come in and get really rough feedback. Because I've been staring at this piece of software here in my face for months, if not years. And you don't want to go put through the whole launch process without having something where you're like, this is at least functionally working and people get it. And there's nothing worse than sitting there watching the screen, because they record the screen and they have the camera with the person. And so it's like watching somebody do a webinar or something, but you're sitting there live and you're like, the button's on the left. The button's on the left, push the button. And they're like, I don't see it. It's like it's so painful, but that's the kind of stuff that we would used to do. And we do that, that was typical user lab research. I mean, back in the day, it used to be like the police thing where you're behind the glass mirror and, it's gotten a lot more easy to do, but still now people are trying to skip that entirely. And there's problems with skipping it entirely because again, the large language models are trained on a specific thing. So they're going to respond based on their training. Now that may or may not help you. But a lot of these things can help you jumpstart. So I don't have $20,000 to do a formal test. I can do some quick guerrilla testing in a Starbucks with some random person and say, I'll buy your coffee if you'll tell me what you think of this. Okay, that's a $50 day. You get a whole bunch of insight, but that's a lot of time. So you can start throwing some stuff around and say, what does a person typically like this do? And again, these are conversations. So you have to start thinking less in graphics and things like this and more in English. And I really think that people who are language majors are finally going to come into their own here, because this is going to be the thing where like, haha, I got it. This is a language model. I've got a language model here. We're going to rock. And people who are not great with written communication are actually going to struggle as these tools become more and more prevalent. But that's one from that. For the marketing thing, looking at, okay, I've got my core message here. And it can be bullet points. I not only want to generate this to target this guy, this person, that group. I want to do it in different voices. So I actually, and this is really funny. So I used to work with a woman named Amy Hoy. We really great stuff in business. She has a 30 by 500 program and stuff like that. So business, launch your idea kind of thing. But she has a really unique writing style, and she writes a whole lot of stuff. And for fun, I was just trying to work on web copy. I'm like, rewrite this in the voice of Amy Hoy. And it was not, I mean, it's not perfect because, it's when you work with somebody closely, you're like, that's not exactly what she would say, but it was 70% there. I was like, that's pretty wild. And, from getting in the ballpark of attitude and tone, definitely there. So you could start saying, okay, I'm going to be pitching people and this all depends on what's out there, right? Like, so you couldn't just say, I'm going to go make this in the voice of my sister if your sister doesn't have a podcast or some written blog or something where it can basically suck that up and process it. But that's the kind of stuff that's going to be fascinating. And also, thinking about like, this is the weird kind of where it starts to get weird, where they're like, yeah, we can basically have an AI model copy you after you die. And I'm like, I don't know about that one. But again, if you have enough video and enough audio and enough written stuff, it can emulate you. It's really twisted but also really powerful. So you can say, make this in my voice, like rewrite these bullet points in paragraph form in my voice.
So I've committed to learning more about AI. And so this is the Living Free Podcast Marketing Foundation draft from ChatGPT. I had a 15-minute discussion.
Nice.
And my next step on this is to take a deeper dive into what happened here after waiting a week or two. But this tagline, I broke out and went through like 9 more iterations for that. Right. So I was a little surprised at how quickly it did. And then it had ideas for generating revenue, a launch plan, right?
Now, did it go out and look at your site? Did it ingest your site as part of this or no?
I did not have it do that.
Okay.
I asked it to act as an agent and then described what I wanted. So what I will do next is have it look at my site and integrate that in. But from like how long it takes me to write my first one of those for any new project standpoint, having that as the foundation is very interesting.
And I think a way to think about this too is if, say, you're a solopreneur or a small business owner, right, where you normally would have to have 5-10 people doing biz dev and all these associated things. If you kind of figure out your prompts really well, it becomes a massive force multiplier for you.
Yeah.
Now, the downside to that is that where do people learn how to do these jobs? Because we all learned kind of cutting our teeth on this miserable, boring, go write this marketing plan. Here's the bullet points. And you're like, oh, okay. But that's how we learned to write a marketing plan, right? Or do whatever. And so at a point, then how do people learn how to do these things? And I don't think we have an answer to that yet. I think
where I keep running into with AI tools is I can write the plan. I wish you'd execute it for me so I don't have to do the daily because it won't do that. It'll be like, I can draft. I was talking to it about marketing the coffee. It's like, do you want me to make you a video? And I was like, okay. And I actually put it out there. It's like, hey, AI just made this video promoting Holler Roast. And,
nice. How did it come out? Was it all right?
It was actually surprisingly good. Like, it was clearly an AI thing.
Yeah.
Because the voice sounds robotic, but it was just funny. And I do that because I want to know, like, it can be a force multiplier, but also I want to recognize when I see other people doing it.
That's the big thing, is training your eye. And because I think, so this is something on the Knightsbridge side we've had to really, really think about, right? With Matt Williams and those guys, where you're like, oh, okay, we're seeing all this stuff come in around this breaking news event. Now, sometimes it's just old footage repurposed and people are and community notes usually catches that pretty quickly. Sometimes now, though, we're starting to see where that's completely an AI generated riot. No bearing on reality. But people post it as news. And so now what used to be our go-to from an open source intelligence perspective is now questioned. And everything has to have multiple angles. So whenever you see a camera angle showing you the truth, especially if something where it's like a major event, if I don't have 2 or 3 other camera angles, that's fake. Or we put it in the most likely fake category, just because anything that big would have multiple people. Just everyone's got a camera now, right? I mean, so if you only have one camera angle, it's probably fake. Especially with the whole, like, all these like drone sightings and all this stuff. It's like, it's like sometimes you're like, there was one that really, it was like, oh, this was filmed from the space station, and it was like this big flying V wing. Well, they did it frame by frame. The problem is the foreground moved at 5 frames and the background moved at 1 frame. And then, so it was obviously like they had slowed down the earth spin to make this thing look like it was moving fast, not thinking that, oh, I have to only jump it when the bottom frame moves. Right. So it's like they didn't know enough about video to fake it. But that was just dumb luck that they didn't realize.
Yeah. And that's coming. Like, that has already, I'm sure it's already come, but that is also coming.
Right.
Right. Well, Tom is taking us to the dark side. So what's the bad things that can happen with AI?
Oh.
Tom says one of the major challenges of large language models and these similar tools is that they are marketed as the easy button, but they are causing us to skip the thinking work. And the reason I was able to get that good of a marketing foundation is I did a bunch of thinking and my prompts were pretty specific, right?
Yeah.
You'll create a crappier product. So
You
let's talk.
will.
What's the dark side? Like, just write me a marketing plan. And it turned out I have, stolen somebody else's creative work and used it, but I didn't realize I stole their words until they sued me.
There's a whole lot of concern with this, right?
Yeah.
And there's a whole. It's not just a legal concern, but an ethical concern and a bunch of stuff like that. So we touched on something really important right there. The easy button, not just the Staples ad anymore, but it literally is this thing like they are marketing this as you don't have to know how to do this. And I would say the only way I'm able to actually do the programming stuff with Claude for Ruby on Rails is because I spent years writing that stuff by hand. So when I'm looking at it, I'm like, no, that's wrong. And I know enough patterns of product development and software development. When I look at Python, I'm like, okay, I can think the tree. I understand what software should do from a flow perspective. I'm like, it's breaking somewhere in 0.3 to 4. Let me go look and see where that is in the code. Whoa, okay, you're missing a loop here, or you're missing this. So like, I still have to know the foundation, same as you had to understand the foundation of what marketing is and how marketing works. It wasn't like it's I think everyone thinks this is going to be like Keanu Reeves in The Matrix, where he wakes up and says, I know Kung Fu. It's not. It definitely is not. Now, I mean, Elon Musk sounds like he's trying to go there with the whole Neuralink thing, but we're definitely nowhere near that. And so I think that the lack of learning is one, like if we've already become very much focused on not retaining facts in our heads because Google's a swipe away. So this could amplify that to a very negative space. So, but on the opposite side of that, right, too, you can use this to help generate a learning plan for yourself to train you and teach you. So, I mean, it's less of the inherent nature of the tool and more of how we use the tool. That's the problem, right? I mean, I think that you could apply that to almost anything in society. The other thing, obviously, is the fraud. Not just in events, but in personal fraud and the lie goes around the world twice before the truth gets its shoes tied, or whatever the famous adage is. If you think about, like, I can sit there and post a picture of this and take it out of context is one thing. Now I can fake something entirely and you can't tell. Yeah. Okay.
So then how do you know if what you buy is what you were supposed to buy?
Right.
Right. Like, you already get, if you order from Temu, you never know what you're going to actually get from Temu.
That's true. Don't order from Temu is what I would say. But
one time, I think about 4 years or 5 years ago, on a Facebook ad, I was advertised a robot vacuum. And so I bought this, and what arrived was, technically it ran on AA batteries, a vacuum-like thing that didn't do a very good job. And it was nothing like the picture, nothing like the video. Like, that's on crack with AI.
And I think you're unfortunately going to see, especially in China, like, so I think to rewind on that is, societally, we have an understanding that you don't do that. You don't lie in business like that. You may fudge stuff, but you don't just say, pretty much if you went to any court in the US and said, I was promised this and given this, they'd be like, nope. That's not the case in other countries. That's not the case in other societies. And so now that we're this international interaction, what do we do? How do we, what are the rules of the road? We don't have any. It is a free for all. And so there's a bit of a learning curve, especially when dealing with international business, on what they'll say, what they'll do, what they'll promise, and then deliver, maybe not. Some companies are really good. We work with a Chinese supplier for Occupy. We do with which is our firearms movement detection system, and they're great. We've had a great experience with them, but it's not like you can just go to any company in China, you're gonna have a great experience. Don't know. It takes a little trial and error finding a good partner. And it's one that also, you can sit there and, there's a language issue too, right? I don't speak Mandarin or Cantonese at all. So I'm relying on their ability to speak English. And they're very good, I mean, especially in written English. But at the same point, like there's sometimes you have to repeat things or change the way you say something to make it, oh, okay, what you need. Okay. So you're not just dealing with societal differences, with language differences. And translation is getting better, but again, it's still interpreted. It's not, especially when you're doing technical stuff or very, very niche things, the translation doesn't always work. So, the benefit is that we're kind of spoiled that a lot of the world knows English. But yeah, I mean, again, there's some of this stuff where you're going to see, the people will use this for negative because they can. I mean, you're going to get the Bernie Madoffs of the world I can make money on this and I'm going to take everyone for a ride. And there are no guardrails to that. So a lot of this has to be developing your gut and also just kind of saying, not taking everything at first blush, which is unfortunate. But it's trust but verify, and it's taking that to a new extreme. So I don't know if that covered exactly where.
I think your influencers who stay true to what they're doing and recommend things are going to be careful about what they got. Well, so if you're an influencer, you need to be careful about what you recommend. Like I was going to do this carnivore challenge this month. And I was like, I'm not recommending it per se. I'm trying it for the first time. If you want to come on the journey, it does cost money, right?
Right.
And this was put on by a company that's like actual people. They didn't get enough participation. And so they refunded my money and said, we didn't have enough participation. We're not doing the challenge anymore. That's all a good experience, by the way, guys. It's disappointing, but it's a good experience. It could have just as easily gone the other way, which is why I wasn't saying, hey, this is a Nicole Sauce endorsed thing. This is just a Nicole Sauce is trying a thing. And that's super important if people follow you, because it just takes one really bad experience and it's a problem.
Yeah. And I think, that's something I know Jack has always made a big deal about that, right? Jack Spirko, where he's like, anything that is being put in my Amazon item of the day, I own. I mean, he says that every time, right? There's a reason, because it's like this is me putting my name on this thing. And he's even come back. I remember he'd been like, hey, this thing used to be great. And then we found out that it did this. So I'm withdrawing my endorsement. Like, so being able to sit there and say, I'm not perfect. And I tell you when I mess up. And it's not even that I messed up. Maybe it's like, oh, well, it was good here, but then we didn't realize this bad part of it over here until you get your hands on it. That's important. And it's having that honesty and that transparency is going to set you apart. I think the one thing I'm starting to see, though, with influencers is the shotgun effect, where, and we've played with this stuff too, right? Opus Clip, some of these tools, right? Where it used to be the nature of creating the content just took time. And therefore, there was a little more editing and a little more value in each clip because it was less volume. You just couldn't do as much. Now I can sit there and spit this video that we're recording right now into Opus Clip, and you'll get back 10 different clips with transcripts, with bubbles switching back and forth on cameras and subtitles. I mean, that's incredible. But it also can then lead to just a signal to noise issue if you're not selecting and editing and down to say these are the important things.
I was doing that for a while, and that did for a while work to drive traffic, and then it stopped being as effective. And it's because everybody's doing it. And where we've gone to now is one of the listeners, Margot, sends me a text later in the week after she's heard it and says, I think it's out of this area, this area, and this area are good. And then we throw specific minute markers into Opus Clip, and then it clips that.
Yeah.
That's where we've gotten to.
Better returns?
A little bit better. At this point, I need to dial in. What I'm finding is the titles and descriptions need more dial in, and thumbnails. So
Video IQ kind of stuff.
Yeah, that kind of thing. And I'm not seeing enough return on any of it. That, like, I have more return on a live birth from the pasture last Friday.
I believe that.
Than anything. And that wasn't even done with the intention of a return. It's just there was a birth happening, and Tactical's like, hey, I brought this camera in case you want to go live, because my actual homestead show was late because I was in the pasture.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, oh, heck, we might as well. And then she was good enough to back up to the camera and give birth on camera. That's, you know,
one more time, give me more. No,
yeah, no, I mean, not really, but I was like, well, you're just kind of in the perfect place and position for us to actually see what's happening.
But that's the kind of thing that's something that can't currently be replicated accurately by AI, right? It would do something. It'd be like, that was not how a lamb gives birth, right? And that's something that, especially like where I think about where I was 15 years ago or, you know, 20 years ago, I would have been really excited to watch that or to see that. Or if, you know, somebody was live streaming, you know, they're hatching their eggs in their incubator, like, oh, I'll be checking in on that, right?
Yeah.
Because it's something I'm not able to do. And it's something, I mean, like, what is that like? What is that? And I mean, yeah, it's totally different when you're sitting out there in 15-degree weather and you're like, you know, you're trying to help this mama birth for the first time. It's like, whew. But it's, you know, it's still one of those things like, okay, I have a base idea of what to expect here. I know kind of the process and the steps. And you kind of start to see like, oh, that looks like she looks like she's laying down and kind of working. I think she's in labor, right? Because I saw that on somebody else's video.
Yeah.
That there's a bit of a jump start or a cheat code there that I don't think AI can fix yet.
And something that is happening with the AI revolution in content is people are forgetting the most important part of how we learn. The way we absorb information and keep information is through story. Even engineers, even if that story is a spreadsheet, you're building those building blocks in your mind for it to stick. And so when we chop that up into tiny little videos, it doesn't always, I mean, you can tell a story in 30 seconds. That's not the problem. But when they're walking off the form of story.
Yeah.
And then things aren't sticking. And then it's like, well, why didn't that stick? It's like, because you broke the pattern. And like a lot of evolution has brought us to the place where that's how our brains work. And sure, everybody's brains work a little bit differently, but basically you separate the story out. I'm not the beauty of the large language model is it's bringing a little bit in how you interact with it, from what are the search terms I put in Google to what's the story I'm trying to frame this around, if you do it right. And as they're bringing the verbal in, it's actually helping the people who can't type sentences, because, you know, I have one of those here. He can type sentences. Tactical can type sentences, but he's a lot faster verbally.
Totally. And that's one of those things with the voice interaction. Like, I'm sure you've played with this, you know, 5 years ago, you would get all sorts of misfires on the word and all sorts of stuff. And it's gotten really close. The thing, so we were running some podcast recordings, like a briefing through Whisper AI, which is a local tool that will run locally on your machine, but you can also run it in the cloud. It's from OpenAI. And this was a year ago now when I did these tests. And on the highest quality setting at the time, it was only missing on homonyms. So instead of spelling Knightsbridge Knight, it dropped the K. So it was still, it would sound right if it read it back to you, but you were like, oh, there's a couple things like that it was like, that's not the right word. And a couple names it misspelled because it didn't know who the individual was. Again, totally expected in that kind of thing. But from the sense of getting an hour-long recording, you know, it was basically real time in the sense of it processed it in about an hour at that highest quality level. That's pretty great. And that's the kind of thing where now it can sit there and, you know, if I can sit there and direct it, much like that Apple commercial, hey, go look up this thing and give me the intersection of blank and blank, right? Of this data set with this data set, and let me know, you know, map that in a heat map or something like that, right? And it can go and do that. That's where things are, you know, that's when all these things start connecting in interesting ways. That's where I think we'll start to see that kind of not AGI, not this, like, you know, this sentient being thing, but the power from an everyday kind of interaction, you know, where people, it's less of that thing. Or, you know, hey, I try and think about this stuff a lot in the sense of my wife, because, you know, this is where I think people miss from a design perspective. Weather apps is a great example. You look at any designer's portfolio and they all have done like some weather app design, and they're all these beautiful things with these crazy backgrounds and all this color and whatnot. And they're crap. Most of the time they were crap. They didn't actually tell you what you needed to know. And Dark Sky was the first one that came along, and it got acquired by Apple. And Apple missed this design memo, unfortunately. You opened it up and it told you the two most important things my wife wanted to know when she was about to head out the door. What is the weather today? Basically, do I need to put the kids in whatever clothing? And what's the next, like, is it going to be raining in the immediate future, right? Or like, what, do I have rain or precipitation or some kind of thing like that, right? And that it gave you that very clearly on that landing screen. Apple's okay with that, with their redesign, but it's not as clear as Dark Sky was. Dark Sky was just chef's kiss, right? It was so good. And it was like, it's one of those things, I use it constantly farming. I would look and be like, oh yeah, I'm going to have rain in 30 minutes. Great. I can go out and get this done right before the rain hits. And I do that all the time, where it's like, today's a 50% chance of rain. Well, I can't plan to just be outside all day, but I can say, here's a bunch of small tasks I can definitely get done. And okay, the rain's coming, but it's going to be gone in 20 minutes. So I'm going to go and do this other one. That's another short task, right? And that kind of stuff. So that's the, again, it's not AI. This is, I think there's a magical, what's the right word to say it? People kind of associate magic here, and there's not magic. It's predictive math. Machine learning is a much better name for what this stuff is. It takes patterns and it formulates things around those patterns, and then it tries to run things against those rules. And most of the time, those work well on a large data set. This is why you see the smaller, older models would often come up with random stuff because they didn't have enough data. Now, training those models is what's super expensive, right? Coming up with a 400 billion parameter model, that's where the cost is. Running it locally is getting easier and easier, but not perfect. Like, I mean, Apple just turned off their predictive news titles because it made a bunch of mistakes in short form back to back, and they were like, we're going to turn that off till we figure it out.
Yeah.
So it's synthesis is hard.
Yeah. Well, and it's just like, there's so much, I think about it from the marketing standpoint of, you go to the search engine, you ask it a question, and it gives you an answer and does not drive you to anybody's website. And so, like, how are we getting in front of people now that Google's going away, right?
Right. I don't have a good answer to that. We've been looking into that, and I've got some friends in Virginia Beach that run a web application firewall company called Wafris, Mike and Ryan, and they've been looking at this. They have a tool they've been playing with. They've been building called Noatoa and some other stuff like that, trying to crack how is AI search working? How is it bringing up that stuff at the top? Interestingly enough, I have noticed they've started putting a link to where they found that information.
Yeah.
And at first I thought it was just copying and pasting, but it is actually synthesizing that page down and writing something else around that. So I always have to click through, especially if I'm looking at current events, did it really say that? Just make sure. Let's go check and see what the actual quote was. Because sometimes, again, it hallucinates. It's not that it couldn't have been that, but it's wrong based on the actual reading of the article.
Yeah, likewise, the recipes it comes up with in that little summary,
I would not trust.
Go look at an actual recipe on an actual website right now.
Man, this chili's hot. Whew.
Yeah, exactly.
Are you sure you like this? Is funny, like misreading a recipe. So this is just a stupid human trick. One of the first times I cooked with Whitney, we did a Paula Deen beef stroganoff, and it said to make up this drench to drench the stuff in, and so it doesn't say not to use it all. It just says completely cover the meat with this stuff. And so I basically made sure it was completely covered and completely used. So that ended up being a cup of salt. It was inedible. But I had never done that before. And I'm like, I don't know, but there's a recipe. I'm following it. Yeah, okay. And you go look, and everybody had written in the comments, don't use all the drench. But I mean, I can't blame AI. Where it's coming back like, yeah, man, this is totally good. Oh yeah, here's this key thing you need to know.
Yeah.
That's why sometimes read the comments is valuable on the internet. Not always, but sometimes.
Okay, so we're getting a little over an hour here. Let's go back and say, people watching this live stream, what 5 or 10 tools would you recommend they start playing with, from the solopreneur standpoint?
So ChatGPT obviously is kind of the original, but it's definitely getting hit from all sides. Here's the interesting thing: there are 5 or 6 that are all competing, and they all come in different price points, right? So if you already use Google Workspace, Gemini is now included. It used to not be. They just shifted in the last couple of days to include that. They're raising everybody's seat price, but everyone gets Gemini across the board.
Yeah.
So you don't have to pay more for it. Play with it. See what it comes out. It may or may not be great for what you're doing. ChatGPT, I find, is still great for searching the internet using the 4.0 model. Claude doesn't do internet search, but from a programming perspective, I find it far more accurate with Python and Ruby. ChatGPT was giving me a lot of bad code. I don't know. This is my personal experience. Llama, the one benefit of Llama is I can run that locally. So especially if you are not able to, you've got a slow connection like we used to, right? I've got, running here in Docker desktop, a thing called Open Web UI, and I've got Ollama 3 70 billion parameter model here. It's a lot. It feels slower than using the web interface because it's using your computer and not all the compute at Amazon or Microsoft or whatever, right? To answer your question. So it's a little slower, but it's all local. So there's a benefit there. So, if you don't have to be connected, it can go out and search the internet as part of its thing, but you might find there's some value there. Some people are playing with stuff that I haven't tried yet. That I just want to mention though. I think it's DeepSeek, and there's one other though that you can actually run across a series of computers at your house. So a couple of people were taking a bunch of Mac Minis and networking them together and spreading out the model across 4 Mac Minis, right? Still expensive, but way cheaper than trying to buy a whole bunch of NVIDIA cards and a server. So that's one that I've got a pretty good response to. It used to be GitHub Copilot. Now it's Microsoft. They kind of pulled it up. Copilot does some interesting stuff. We've played with that for marketing. And we actually generated our 12 days of Christmas social campaign for Occupy out of that. And then we were like, okay, we're going to clean this up. But a lot of these are excellent first drafts. Or if you have, sometimes I'm just like, the coffee is not kicking in. My brain is not firing on that cylinder today. I need a jump start. I just start throwing stuff in there, and all of a sudden it's like, okay, we're off to the races. Now it's not the first draft, like you were saying with the marketing thing, right? With you had to keep revving it. That's totally the expectation here. It is not an easy button. It is an overeager intern with a whole lot of knowledge, but not sure how to apply it. So I always approach it where I'm not. I'm working, and I'm actually just getting that feedback loop in an interesting way that I can't normally do. By myself, especially if you're working like I do from home with, I don't have a water cooler. I can go to the kitchen and talk with my wife if she's not on a call, but that doesn't always happen, right? Our schedules don't align like that all the time. So those are kind of like the text-based ones. In the image world, there's 5 or 6 that are, the big ones. Midjourney is the one that most people are familiar with. Stable Diffusion and DALL-E. You can run Stable Diffusion locally pretty effectively. There's also some newer ones like Flux, which is part of Grok. You can get to that through Grok and X and Twitter. Leonardo is another one, and then Ideogram is one I've heard of, but I haven't played with. That people are saying gets really cool. Ideogram. I haven't played with that one, but people are saying it has some really cool photoreal stuff in it. And then the video stuff I haven't touched at all, but I've got a friend up in Chicago that does video work, and it's insane. Like you're starting like there was what was it? Coca-Cola did a Christmas commercial that was mostly AI, and it was done by a famous director. Like a famous director used AI to do this commercial, right? So there's still a heavy creative presence pulling this together and directing it. But it was an interesting thing where you're like something. We call it the uncanny valley in video, right? Where you're like, that's not real. Something's wrong.
Right.
that person looks a little weird, like that's like a robot thing. But that stuff gets better and better every day. And yeah, so those are some of the big ones. There's if you are interested from a solopreneur, like if you were really going to go down the rabbit hole and like train your own models and get into that deep. So NVIDIA just released this thing called Digits, which is a $3,000 desktop computer for home researchers training their own models.
What's it called?
Digits, DIGITS. And it's just been announced, a couple of weeks ago. It's one of those things where we'll see how it's actually applied. It's not just to run your model; it's for building models and training stuff. So if you're going to be doing model development or things of that nature, it's something that'll be good there. And yeah, a lot of these, the pro versions are $10, $20 a month. So I would try them all out, see which ones get you good results. Microsoft Copilot, if you've got Windows, I think it's pretty much built in. I think there's no additional cost, so you might as well try it. It's not like you got to spend any money. And again, trust but verify with all this stuff. Like these are all really cool ideas, and you can go really far, but you got to figure it out. And one thing in ChatGPT to look, you can go in there and actually look for those kind of sub-trained models. So finding, like we were doing some research into sugar substitutes, and there's one that's all medical papers. And so it was giving you results with links to the medical paper where it found it. So those are the kind of things to start thinking about. Here's my narrowcast. Has anybody built models in my niche, and how good are they then? Try them out. Because that's where you're going to have a stronger personal knowledge of what's going on, and the bullshit detector is going to be easier to trigger. Like that doesn't seem right. And then you can go look at the paper it's from. You can be like, oh, this thing totally misinterpreted this paper, or wow, I didn't know that. So the niching, and I've mostly seen the niches come from ChatGPT, where you can go in and explore GPTs on the left hand side. There's a whole thing. So Consensus is the one that I'm talking about with the medical papers. But there's a whole lot of them, and there's one that is focused on fundraising that my wife plays with. So all these things, you just got to explore and see what's out there. And I'd love to hear, what people are playing with too, because there's so much, and this changes so fast.
I know that ChatGPT is a research tool. When you ask it to bring you to the sources is helpful, but the sources of the sources are more helpful. That's what I found. So it'll always bring me some like magazine style article, and I'm like, but what informed that article? Okay, that's where I'm actually, trying to get what I need to get.
Yeah.
So when you want to go on a deeper level, that's what I've been doing.
Exactly. Yeah, and all that stuff is just it's experimentation, because you'll find what works for you, right? You started to see, I'm getting things like that make sense here or there that I've verified. So. Yeah,
and I would say the challenge is you start using them and you get crap back originally.
Oh, yeah.
Like you're going to type some crap in, it's going to give you some crap back. You're going to be like, why do people use this? And then you start trying different things, and then you come across other people's prompts, and you're like, oh, I see. Yep. I'll try that prompt. It makes a huge difference, right? So, yeah.
And there's Ethan Mollick is a researcher that's done. He wrote a book, and he's also got a I don't know if it's a Substack or not, but he wrote a book called Co-Intelligence, called Living and Working with AI, that came out last year, which it's more timeless, because it's more about a theory about how you think about it, how you integrate with it. That's really been informative. And then he's got a Substack or a blog that he publishes stuff on weekly. That's a good way to keep up with some of this stuff. Again, this could be a full-time job, somebody following the trends and developments in AI. So,
and there are people doing it.
And there are people doing it. Yeah. But it's also kind of figuring out what works for you and where provides you value. Like for me, most of that is in Claude with, Rails and Python, and then also kind of using ChatGPT broadly on just kind of research, brainstorming, things of that nature. And then, for others, it's going to be something else, right? I'm not doing material sciences, so I don't really care about those models. I've got nothing that I can benefit from playing with those. So kind of see what's out there and do a lot of searching, and we'll, and go from there. What's up, Yankee? I think it's worth playing with on any deep dive, right? And it'll be interesting. Like there's times where I've had to summarize. I found a news source, and I'll tell ChatGPT, go find 4 additional sources and write me 3 paragraphs on this. And it's an excellent first draft, especially when you tell it to do that. And you got to just make sure it's not plagiarizing, but it's gotten pretty good at trying to not plagiarize. It tries to actually rewrite it, in a way that is not a copy, unless it's a quote. And sometimes it'll skip the quotes entirely because it doesn't want to plagiarize, and you got to go get a first person quote out of the original source article. But each paragraph it's writing, it'll give you 2 little links after it. And those are sources that it used. So you can actually, it's not just a generating copy for you, right? It's helping you find sources and helping you find value in that. So, we have days where we're just like, I don't want to.
Yeah.
this can help get over some of the I don't want to humps, right? And it's, but again, it's not a magic button. It is more of I just always recommend people think of it as that overeager intern, and usually you don't get disappointed in the outcome.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. Well, if people want to connect with you, how do they do it?
So you can find our not often updated blog for the farm at Sfumato, SFUMATO farm.com. I am on all the socials. So Blue Sky, Twitter, X, mostly it's John Athayde, all one word. There's a farm channel on there as well. From a branding and product development perspective, that's meticulous.com. And that's also where I'm doing the work with my business partners on Occufy, OCUFII, which is our firearm safety product. And then Knightsbridge.ltd for open source intelligence.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for making time today, Jim.
Thank you for having me.
All right, guys, if you like the show and want to support the work I'm doing here, you can do it in 2 ways. 1, get your coffee at hollerroast.com. 2, consider becoming a member. Our member webinar that was supposed to be last Sunday got snowed out. So it is now this Sunday at 3 p.m. with Sean Mills on solar. That's at livingfreeintennessee.com. With that, guys, go out and make it a great week. Laziest